The year 2024 has drawn to a close, leaving a somber mark on the world of aviation. After years of improving safety records, we've witnessed a stark and unsettling reversal. The numbers are grim, a sharp, dramatic increase in aviation fatalities compared to the relative calm of 2023. This isn't just a statistical anomaly, it represents hundreds of lives lost, families shattered, and a renewed sense of unease about the safety of our skies. It forces us to ask difficult questions about the state of the industry, the pressures on pilots and crew, and the very systems we trust to carry us safely across the globe. What makes this year particularly tragic is the timing of its deadliest events. The final week of 2024, a time typically associated with holidays and family, was marred by two catastrophic crashes that accounted for a significant portion of the year's total fatalities. These incidents, occurring just days apart, sent shockwaves through the international community and served as a brutal reminder of the inherent risks of air travel. They were not isolated events in remote corners of the world, they were major disasters that captured global attention and underscored the fragility of life, even within the supposed safety of a modern aircraft. Tonight, we're going to take a closer look. We'll go beyond the headlines and the initial reports to understand what went wrong. We'll examine the chain of events, the human factors, and the technical failures that led to these tragedies. From a catastrophic runway collision at one of the world's busiest airports to a passenger jet brought down amidst geopolitical conflict and a routine flight that ended in disaster, these stories are different, yet they are all part of a larger, more troubling picture. This is a look at 2024, a year that will be remembered as aviation's deadliest since 2018, and a search for the lessons we must learn to prevent it from happening again. It was supposed to be a routine landing at one of the world's most efficient and busiest hubs, Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Japan Airlines Flight 516, an Airbus A350, was on its final approach, carrying hundreds of passengers home. On the ground, a smaller Japan Coast Guard aircraft, a Dash 8, was preparing for a critical mission, delivering aid to the earthquake-stricken Noto Peninsula. Two aircraft, two different missions, set on a collision course that nobody saw coming until it was far too late. The sky was clear, the procedures were standard, but something went terribly wrong. The investigation would later piece together a sequence of events rooted in a fatal miscommunication. The air traffic control tower had cleared the Japan Airlines flight to land on runway 34 right. That instruction was clear, precise, and standard procedure. Simultaneously, the Coast Guard aircraft was instructed to hold short of that same runway. It was a critical command, a red line that should never have been crossed. Yet for reasons that are still being debated and analyzed, the Dash 8 taxied onto the active runway, directly into the path of the descending Airbus. Imagine the scene from the A350's cockpit. The pilots focused on a perfect landing, suddenly seeing the unmistakable shape of another aircraft where only empty tarmac should be. There was no time to react, no space to maneuver. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The massive Airbus traveling at landing speed slammed into the smaller plane, engulfing it in a fireball. The force of the collision was immense, a horrifying spectacle of metal tearing and fuel igniting visible for miles around the airport. For the passengers on Flight 516, the smooth landing they anticipated turned into a nightmare of smoke, fire, and violent shaking. The cabin was plunged into darkness, then filled with an orange glow as flames began to lick at the windows. The training of the cabin crew in that moment was nothing short of heroic. Amidst the chaos and rising panic, they initiated an emergency evacuation, their calm and authoritative voices cutting through the fear. They knew every second was critical as the state-of-the-art A350 began to burn around them. The evacuation itself is a case study in both human resilience and the importance of safety procedures. Passengers, terrified but disciplined, left their belongings behind. A crucial instruction that undoubtedly saved lives by keeping the aisles clear. They slid down the emergency chutes onto the dark tarmac, escaping the inferno that was rapidly consuming the aircraft. All 379 people aboard the Airbus miraculously survived, a testament to modern aircraft design and the crew's professionalism. But the story was tragically different for the other aircraft. On the runway, the Japan Coast Guard Dash 8 was obliterated. The fire was too intense, the impact too severe. 5 of the 6 crew members on board were killed instantly. These were individuals on a humanitarian mission, preparing to help their fellow citizens in a time of crisis, whose lives were cut short in a flash of confusion and error. The sole survivor, the captain, was severely injured, left to carry the physical and emotional scars of that night. The contrast between the two outcomes was stark and devastating. The immediate aftermath was a scene of controlled chaos. Emergency services swarmed the runway, battling the massive blaze that had once been a billion-dollar airliner. Investigators from Japan's Transport Safety Board arrived, their task to sift through the wreckage and, more importantly, to analyze the cockpit voice recorders and flight data recorders. The key to understanding this tragedy lay in the final moments of communication between the tower and the two aircraft. The question was simple, yet profound. Why? The transcript of the air traffic control recordings revealed the chilling truth. The controller's instructions were correct. The Japan Airlines pilots were following their clearance to land. The breakdown occurred with the Coast Guard crew. The investigation focused on whether they misunderstood the instruction, whether they believed they were cleared to enter the runway, or if some other factor, perhaps a lapse in situational awareness, led them to make that fatal move. This was not a failure of technology, but a deeply human one. This incident sent a ripple of concern through the global aviation community. Haneda is a model for airport efficiency and safety. If a runway incursion of this magnitude could happen there, it could happen anywhere. It highlighted the immense pressure on air traffic controllers who manage dozens of movements simultaneously, and on pilots who must maintain constant vigilance, especially during the critical phases of takeoff and landing. The margin for error is virtually non-existent. The destruction of the Airbus A350 was another significant aspect of this disaster. It was the first ever hull loss of this advanced, composite material aircraft. While its structure and fire-retardant materials played a key role in allowing the passengers to escape, seeing the burned-out shell of one of the world's most modern jets was a sobering image. It demonstrated that no matter how advanced the technology, the fundamentals of aviation safety, clear communication and adherence to procedure, remain paramount. The human element is at the heart of this story. We think of aviation as a world of computers and automation, but it is still guided by people. People in the control tower, people in the cockpit, people in the cabin. The Haneda collision was a tragic reminder that these people are fallible. Fatigue, distraction, misinterpretation, these are human factors that safety systems are designed to mitigate, but sometimes a series of small errors can align to create a catastrophe. In the weeks that followed, airports around the world reviewed their runway safety protocols. The incident prompted discussions about new technologies, such as advanced surface movement guidance and control systems, which can provide an additional layer of protection against runway incursions. These systems can alert controllers and pilots when an aircraft is in the wrong place, potentially breaking the chain of error before it leads to disaster. The legacy of the Haneda collision is complex. It is a story of incredible survival and heroic action by the Japan Airlines crew. It is a story of tragic loss for the Japan Coast Guard. And it is a powerful, urgent warning to the entire aviation industry. It underscores the fact that the most dangerous part of a flight can sometimes be the final few seconds on the ground, where the intricate dance of arriving and departing aircraft depends on flawless communication. As investigators finalized their report, the focus shifted from blame to prevention. How can we strengthen the system to make it more resilient to human error? How can we ensure that a simple misunderstanding doesn't lead to such devastating consequences? The lessons learned from the fire-blackened tarmac at Haneda are being written into the training manuals and operational procedures that will, hopefully, prevent a repeat of that terrible night. The images of the burning A350 are seared into the collective memory of 2024. They represent a moment when the carefully constructed system of air travel safety broke down in the most public and dramatic way. It serves as a constant reminder that vigilance can never be relaxed, and that the pursuit of safety is a journey with no final destination. The lives lost demand nothing less. In the skies over the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 was on a routine international journey. The Embraer E190, a reliable and widely used regional jet, was flying from Baku to Grozny, a route that traverses a region of complex and often volatile geopolitics. For the 67 souls on board, it was just another flight. They were business travelers, families, individuals traveling between two nations with deep historical and cultural ties. They had no reason to believe their journey would be anything other than ordinary. The aircraft was cruising at its designated altitude, a tiny speck in a vast, clear sky. The pilots were in contact with air traffic control, everything proceeding as planned. Then, without warning, the unthinkable happened. A surface-to-air missile, fired from an undisclosed location, streaked towards the unsuspecting passenger jet. The pilots would have had no time to react, no indication of the imminent danger. The missile's warhead detonated, and in an instant, Flight 8243 was torn from the sky. The immediate aftermath was a terrifying silence. The aircraft disappeared from radar screens. Air traffic controllers, moments before in routine contact, were now calling into a void. Their repeated attempts to reach the flight met with nothing. On the ground, confusion quickly turned to horror as reports began to surface of wreckage falling from the sky. Debris from the shattered Embraer rained down over a wide area, a grim confirmation of a catastrophic in-flight event. The world watched in shock as the news broke. A civilian airliner had been shot down. The questions came thick and fast. Who fired the missile? Was it intentional? Was it a tragic mistake? The incident immediately escalated geopolitical tensions in an already fraught region. Fingers were pointed, accusations were hurled, and denials were issued. The truth became a casualty, lost in a fog of propaganda and political maneuvering. The victims and their families were caught in the crossfire, their personal tragedy now a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game. For the investigators, the task was immensely challenging. Unlike a typical accident investigation focused on mechanical failure or pilot error, this was a crime scene. Collecting wreckage was not just about piecing together an aircraft, it was about finding evidence of the weapon that destroyed it. Fragments of the missile, shrapnel patterns on the fuselage. These were the clues that could identify the type of weapon used and, potentially, who was responsible for firing it. The human toll was devastating. 67 lives, each with a story, a family, a future, were extinguished in a moment of violence. As the names and nationalities of the victims were released, the global scope of the tragedy became clear. They were not soldiers, they were civilians. They were mothers, fathers, children, and friends. Their deaths served as a brutal reminder that in modern conflicts the lines between combatants and non-combatants can be tragically and illegally blurred. This event drew immediate and chilling parallels to the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 over Ukraine in 2014. Once again, a commercial flight had become entangled in a regional conflict, with devastating consequences. It raised urgent questions about the safety of flying over conflict zones. Who is responsible for assessing the risk? Airlines, national civil aviation authorities, or international bodies? And when intelligence suggests a potential threat, at what point should a flight path be declared unsafe? The political fallout was intense. The government of Azerbaijan condemned the act as a barbaric act of terrorism and vowed to bring the perpetrators to justice. Neighboring countries and global powers called for a full, independent investigation, but the geopolitical realities of the region made such a prospect difficult. Access to the missile launch site was likely impossible, and cooperation from potential state or non-state actors involved was non-existent. The search for accountability was fraught with obstacles. The black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, and flight data recorder were eventually recovered from the wreckage. While they couldn't show the missile approaching, they provided a harrowing record of the aircraft's final moments. The data would have shown a perfectly normal flight, followed by a sudden catastrophic decompression and system failure as the missile struck. The voices in the cockpit would have been calm one moment, and then silence. A chilling testament to the suddenness of the attack. The incident forced a global conversation about the proliferation of sophisticated anti-aircraft weaponry. These systems, once the sole domain of national armies, have increasingly found their way into the hands of non-state actors and militias. For the aviation industry, this represents a terrifying and unpredictable threat. A commercial airliner following its approved flight plan has no defense against such a weapon. It is a soft target, a victim of conflicts it has no part in. For the families of the victims, the lack of clear answers was an agonizing torment. They were left to grieve in a vacuum of information, their quest for justice stymied by international politics. Memorials were held, and tributes were paid. But the fundamental questions of who was responsible and why remained unanswered. Their loss was compounded by the knowledge that this was not an accident, but a deliberate act of violence. The downing of Flight 8243 served as a dark bookend to a year of rising aviation dangers. It shifted the focus from technical and human error to external, malicious threats. It demonstrated that even with the safest aircraft and the best-trained crews, civilian aviation remains vulnerable to the conflicts that rage on the ground below. The sky, which we often see as a realm of freedom and connection, can also become a battlefield. Airlines and aviation authorities immediately began rerouting flights to avoid the entire region, creating longer and more costly journeys. The so-called risk assessment for flying over or near conflict zones was fundamentally reevaluated. The margin of safety had to be widened, creating vast no-fly zones over areas previously considered safe enough for transit at high altitudes. The economic and logistical impact was significant but necessary. The legacy of Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 is one of profound sadness and unresolved anger. It is a story about the devastating collateral damage of modern warfare. The 67 people who died were not just statistics in a deadly year for aviation. They were victims of an act that violated international law and basic human decency. Their memory serves as a demand for greater protection of civilian aircraft in a world where conflicts are becoming more frequent and more technologically advanced. As 2024 came to a close, the wreckage of the Embraer jet served as a stark symbol of this new and terrifying vulnerability. The investigation may never reach a definitive public conclusion, and justice for the victims may remain elusive. But the incident has irrevocably changed the calculus of risk for the global aviation industry, a tragic lesson written in the sky over the Caspian Sea. In contrast to the high drama and geopolitical intrigue of the year's other major crashes, the loss of Sauria Airlines Flight 9 NAME in Nepal was a story of a different kind. It was a story that is in many ways more familiar and honestly, perhaps more unsettling for the average flyer. This was a routine domestic flight, just a short hop from Kathmandu on a workhorse aircraft, the Bombardier CRJ-200. There were no missiles, no runway collisions, just a sudden and catastrophic technical failure. The flight, designated 9 NAME, took off from Tribhuvan International Airport with a small number of passengers and crew. For the first few minutes, everything was normal. The twin-engine jet climbed out of the Kathmandu Valley, a procedure its pilots had performed countless times. The CRJ-200 is a common sight at regional airports around the world, known for its reliability. But on this day, something deep within the aircraft's complex systems was about to go terribly wrong. Without warning, the pilots were confronted with a critical emergency. Initial reports from Nepal's Civil Aviation Authority pointed towards a dual-engine failure. For any pilot, losing one engine is a serious but manageable situation. Losing both engines simultaneously is the ultimate nightmare scenario, turning a powered aircraft into a glider with rapidly diminishing options. The pilots were suddenly in a desperate race against time and gravity. They declared an emergency, their voices calm but strained over the radio, alerting air traffic control to their dire situation. Their training would have kicked in immediately. Checklists for attempting to restart the engines, calculating their best glide path, and desperately searching for a place to attempt an emergency landing. But Nepal's terrain is notoriously unforgiving. The country is home to 8 of the world's 10 highest peaks. Flat open spaces suitable for a powerless landing are few and far between. The aircraft was losing altitude fast. The pilots, fighting to maintain control, would have been wrestling with the controls, their eyes scanning the rugged landscape below for any chance of survival. On board, the passengers would have known something was terribly wrong. The sudden silence from the engines, the steepening angle of descent, the urgent instructions from the cabin crew, it would have been moments of pure terror and uncertainty. Tragically, they ran out of altitude and options. The CRJ-200 crashed into a mountainside, far from any airport. The impact was devastating, and there were no survivors. Emergency crews facing difficult terrain and weather took hours to reach the remote crash site. What they found was a scene of total destruction, confirming the worst fears of everyone who had been tracking the flight's fate. The routine flight had ended in absolute disaster. The investigation that followed focused immediately on the mechanics of the aircraft and its maintenance history. Why would 2 reliable engines fail at the same time? Investigators from Nepal, along with representatives from Canada, where the aircraft was manufactured, and the United States, where the engines were made, converged on the site. Their job was to meticulously examine the wreckage, paying special attention to the engines and their related fuel and electrical systems. This type of accident underscores a fundamental truth about aviation. While major disasters are rare, the majority of them are not caused by exotic, headline-grabbing events. They're more often the result of a chain of seemingly small factors: a latent mechanical defect, a missed item on a maintenance check, a flawed repair, or a component that failed before its expected lifespan. It's the slow, quiet accumulation of risk that can suddenly manifest in catastrophe. The crash of 9 NAME brought renewed scrutiny to Nepal's aviation safety record. The country's challenging topography, variable weather, and economic pressures on its airlines have historically contributed to a higher-than-average accident rate. The European Union has, for years, included all Nepalese airlines on its air safety blacklist, citing concerns over safety oversight. This crash, involving a relatively modern jet, amplified those concerns on the international stage. For the public, this kind of accident can be deeply unsettling. We put our trust in the maintenance crews who service the planes, the inspectors who certify them as airworthy, and the manufacturers who build them. The idea that a fundamental component like an engine, let alone 2 of them, could simply fail raises questions about the integrity of that entire system of trust. It reminds us that despite all the redundancies, we are flying in incredibly complex machines. The investigation would likely focus on potential common causes for the dual engine failure. Was it fuel contamination? A problem with the fuel delivery system that affected both engines? A catastrophic failure of the aircraft's electrical system that controls the engines? Or was it the incredibly rare, almost statistically impossible coincidence of 2 separate, unrelated engine failures occurring at the same time? Each possibility would be painstakingly explored. The black boxes would be crucial. The flight data recorder would show the exact parameters of each engine in the moments leading up to the failure: RPM, temperature, fuel flow. The cockpit voice recorder would capture the pilot's actions, their attempts to diagnose the problem, and their efforts to save the aircraft. Together, these recorders would provide a second-by-second timeline of the disaster, allowing investigators to reconstruct the chain of events. The loss of Saurya Airlines Flight 9 NAME is a story about the mundane reality of aviation risk. It's not about malice or conflict, but about the constant battle against entropy, metal fatigue, and mechanical failure. every single flight is a testament to the success of that battle, a success achieved through rigorous maintenance, constant inspection, and redundant safety systems. But this crash is a stark reminder that the battle can, on rare occasions, be lost. This incident, while smaller in scale than the Haneda collision, or the downing of Flight 8243, is a critical piece of the 2024 aviation story. It represents the baseline risk that the industry works to mitigate every single day. It highlights the importance of robust regulatory oversight, particularly in challenging operating environments like Nepal. It's a call for continuous improvement in maintenance practices and diagnostic technologies. As we remember the victims of this flight, we are reminded that safety is not a given. It is earned every day through the diligent work of thousands of people on the ground. The crash of 9 NAME serves as a somber lesson that even on the most routine of days, on the most ordinary of flights, vigilance is the price of safety in the skies. So when we look back at 2024, it's clear the narrative of ever-improving air safety was, well, tragically interrupted. The numbers tell one story, the deadliest year since 2018, but the individual events tell a much deeper one. At Haneda, we saw how human error can defeat the most advanced systems, but also how a well-trained crew can perform miracles amidst chaos. Over the Caspian, we were given a brutal lesson in the vulnerability of civilian life when a flight path crosses a conflict zone, a reminder that the world's problems don't stop at 30,000 feet. And in the mountains of Nepal, we were confronted with the fundamental, ever-present risk of mechanical failure. These are not separate, isolated stories. They are three distinct points that form a troubling picture of the current state of aviation. They touch on human factors, geopolitical threats, and technical integrity, the three pillars on which air safety rests. A failure in any one of them can be catastrophic. The challenge for the industry, for regulators, and for governments is to learn from the fire on the runway, the missile in the sky, and the silence of failed engines. The cost of not learning is measured in lives, and the cost this year was far too high. The path forward requires a renewed commitment to the basics, rigorous training, clear communication, robust maintenance, and a realistic assessment of risk. It means using technology not to replace human oversight, but to enhance it. It means demanding accountability and transparency when civilian lives are lost to conflict. Ultimately, it's about honoring the memory of every person who boarded a flight in 2024 and never made it home, by ensuring we do everything in our power to strengthen the system they put their trust in. The skies must be and must remain a symbol of connection, not of tragedy.